Hello, everyone. Happy Women's Day, and welcome to this Nicaragua webinar, Beyond the Basics, Nicaragua's Extraordinary Commitment to Human Rights and International Law. My name is Nan McCurdy, and I'm one of your co-moderators today, along with Becca Rank. We'll hear from our speakers in a few minutes, but first we have a few announcements. We want to thank Yoav Ali thank Dr. Arnie Matlin for monitoring the chat. The primary sponsor of today's webinar is the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. We also thank our many other organizational co-sponsors who will be listed in the chat. Feel free to use the chat function to offer comments throughout this event. We ask you to use it in respectful ways that don't distract from the program. And please put your questions for the speakers in the Q&A. See the button at the bottom of your screen. We'll select your questions to pose to our speakers. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to all registrants within the next few days. When ready, it will also be posted on the website of the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition, nicasolidarity.com, and also on its YouTube channel. If you'd like to become more active in supporting Nicaragua's sovereignty and opposing foreign interference, please join the International Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. You can check their website regularly for updates and news.com. Subscribe to the newsletter, monthly meetings, action alerts, and other notices from the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. See the link in the chat. The next general meeting is on Monday, March 9th, tomorrow. The coalition meets on the second Monday of each month at 2:30 Eastern Time. Email the coalition for the Zoom link. See the email in the chat. We're also putting other links in the chat to subscribe to the NicaNet email list and Nica Notes, and to download ebooks about Nicaragua. This information will be in the chat. To stay up to date with events and issues, a Google group moderated list. The address is in the chat. And read Nica Notes and subscribe for a weekly article by an invited author, followed by Nicaraguan news updates, also in the chat. Several ebooks about Nicaragua are available at afgj.org in several formats. To find the books, scroll down toward the bottom of the page on afgj.org's website and look to the right side. This is also in the chat. Now I have an announcement related to the U.S. blockade of Cuba. The Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition is asking for your donation for material aid to Cuba in response to the U.S. blockade. If you are in Nicaragua, please bring donations of medicines, food, and other supplies to San Pablo Apostle Christian-based community. Contact information is in the chat. People in other countries, even the United States, can donate to the Hattuey, H-A-T-U-E-Y project, which provides Cuban children with cancer medicines. The donation link is in the chat. We are hoping to raise $10,000. Please give generously if you can. Thank you. And now we turn to today's program. We'll hear from 3 speakers, all part of the National Lawyers Guild. This will be followed by a question and answer period. Please do keep entering your questions in the Q&A throughout the webinar. It is my pleasure to introduce Martha Schmidt. She is a retired labor and employment lawyer with a postdoc in international law who works on making the right to health a reality in the United States, active with National Single Payer. She is part of the task force of the People's Academy of International Law, which provides education online for lawyers and activists on law, including the UN Charter and human rights law, to make change. Thank you for being with us, Martha. You have the floor. And you're also muted still.
Good.
There you go.
Thank you very much to the Solidarity Coalition. And I want particularly to thank Colleen Littlejohn, who organized and hosted our delegation, Rebecca Rank for simultaneous interpretation, and a special thanks to Harold Urbina of Casa Ben Linder, with whom I started a dialogue about international human rights back in November 2024 when I was in Nicaragua on a healthcare delegation. So I'm going to be focusing on how Nicaragua views international human rights, including collective rights to peace, to development, and to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, its emphasis on social, economic, and cultural rights, and its commitment to the framework and institutions of international law centered on the UN and the International Court of Justice. I'll also mention that I am motivated to understand Nicaragua better as a result of solidarity work through the International Committee of the National Lawyers Guild and our Human Rights Framework Subcommittee, which has tried to hold the US accountable for its many violations of human rights. To summarize briefly our delegation activity, we met with the UN ambassador, the central bank president, former diplomats and lawyers involved with representing Nicaragua at the UN and in litigation before the International Court of Justice, members of the National Assembly, heads of the Ministries of Health, Education, Youth, and Disaster Prevention Mitigation, the Managua Mayor's Office, and leaders of an agricultural cooperative. It was truly amazing. And I wanted to say, since it's International Women's Day, that I'd like to applaud Nicaragua for its commitment to achieving women's equality, an important component of international human rights. It is no small accomplishment that Nicaragua is globally recognized as the 6th most equal country for women. We saw and heard that during this trip. The UN delegation is majority women. The National Assembly has over 50% women, and women are equally represented in the leadership of the National Assembly Commission on Affairs of First Nations, Afro-descendant peoples and nations, autonomous regions. The mayor of the largest city, Managua, is a woman, and her staff, whom we also met, reflect equal status of women in leadership. In our meetings with the ministries, women were both heads of the ministries and administrative branch advisors to the ministries, sometimes both. These included MINSA, Health, MINED, Education, SINAPRED, Disaster Prevention and Mitigation, and MINHUVE, Youth. We also heard about Nicaragua's efforts to bring the rest of the world up to a higher standard of equality, of its work in the last COP in Rio, when Nicaragua tried to get a 50% quota rule adopted for women's participation, which Brazil supported, but which Western governments rejected. What is clear is that women gain equality when a state makes economic, social, and cultural rights, especially education, health and housing, publicly financed and freely accessible. Nicaragua's universal single-payer financed healthcare and free schooling through university level are just key. From the standpoint of people in the U.S., what is needed for building a relationship of solidarity with Nicaragua around human rights is to listen, to try to understand history, and avoid reinforcing colonialist and hegemonic relations. The human rights universe includes collective rights, specifically the rights to peace, the right to development, and the right to a safe, healthy, and sustainable environment, as well as individual rights, which include economic, social, cultural, civil, and political rights. While people in the US may be aware of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, they may not have heard of the rights to peace and to development. All these are important to people in Nicaragua and are acted upon and given priority by representatives of Nicaragua internationally, and they guide the domestic policies of the country. For example, Nicaragua has long been involved in negotiations to address climate change through the UN system, advocating for the lesser developed countries, and was instrumental in creating the Green Climate Fund, while it itself transitioned to a domestic economy in which 96% of its electrical grid is from renewables. Nicaragua makes the eradication of extreme poverty a key part of its development plan, and its large investment priorities are infrastructure, housing, including social housing, health, and education. It also has developed its own set of measurements of development, of human development, finding the World Bank's focus on consumption insufficient. It factors in more nuanced criteria, such as where people live, what kind of home they have, floor, roof, etc., what fuel is used, their income, education, their access to water and food. Often in the US, only a subset of individual rights is the focus, civil and political rights. Even further narrowing our idea of what is perceived as human rights are the discourse and media coverage relegated almost exclusively to the right to vote, the right to assemble, speak, and organize or associate, and due process. Even the right of non-discrimination and equality, which undergirds all other rights, is often only mentioned in connection to civil and political rights. Sovereign states, of course, are free to choose their human rights priorities and should be able to do that without being subject to US aggression. Nicaragua gives priority to social, economic, and cultural rights, ESC rights, such as health, education, housing, and adequate standard of living, rest, leisure, and participation in cultural life, including access to technology. Human rights decisions will of necessity be based on the aspirations of a society and its economic conditions. What I saw was that the priority accorded to ESC rights is highly interdependent with the right to development and the economic conditions of Nicaragua. In our long and informative meeting with the president of the Banco Central, he confirmed that these priorities get the majority of funding. It provided me an opportunity to think about the linkage between national economic priorities, the budget, and the realization of human rights. This is an issue which is very topical in the US, where although the US spends the most in the world on healthcare, it has poor outcomes because there is no respect for the human right to health. Instead, access and outcomes are sliding downward while Congress funds profits of health corporations. We had unique and valuable opportunities to learn the history of Nicaragua's many roles as a member of the United Nations, including its period of presidency of the General Assembly, its groundbreaking uses of the International Court of Justice, its foreign relations with other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean region, and its leadership in calling for gender equality. These legal and diplomatic issues were addressed by Nicaragua's permanent representative to the UN and two other diplomats of the delegation, as well as by retired diplomats and lawyers who've litigated at the ICJ and assisted in the Nicaraguan delegation's work with the UN General Assembly and other UN bodies. We had especially wanted to explore future solidarity activity in relation to the International Court of Justice decision that Nicaragua won against the United States in 1986, for which the US never paid court-ordered reparations of about $17 billion. That case was military and paramilitary activities in and against Nicaragua and had to do with US state terrorism. To give context to that case for those who may not know, tens of thousands of people were murdered and many more injured in the Contra War of the 1980s. That war, by the murderous Reagan administration, was financed by the importation of drugs from Central America into Black communities in the United States. In its 1986 decision, the ICJ rejected the phony argument the US government made that it was engaging in, quote, collective self-defense in behalf of the government of El Salvador in funding the Contras. By the way, this is like the current Office of Legal Counsel of the Department of Justice, which is saying in a quasi-secret memo that the murdering of sailors and on boats in the Eastern Pacific is legal because it's collective self-defense. The court decided for Nicaragua based on legal principles that are so integral to the right to peace, which are also in the UN Charter. The duty not to use force against another country, the duty not to interfere in the internal affairs of another country, the duty to respect the national sovereignty and territorial integrity of another country. Oh, but could the US take that seriously now? The decision in Nicaragua's favor, we learned in our meetings, was a turning point in history. It was the most significant case of the International Court of Justice for the Global South. It built confidence in the ICJ as an institution of the formerly colonized states, who were, of course, skeptical whether it was possible to get a fair result from an international system designed by the colonizers. The Nicaragua v. United States of America decision, as Harold Urbina said in an interview in March 2025, is a, quote, moral defeat for imperialism. Although old history, this moral defeat seems worth talking about now. I also must mention, given US warring and threats since January, that in 1986, the US government was using similar arguments to get US people to approve aggression against Nicaragua as it is using now against Venezuela and other states, terrorism, drug trafficking, etc. Another area we learned about is Nicaragua's leadership and support for self-determination of peoples and multilateralism. A Nicaraguan serves as vice president on the Committee for the Exercise of the Rights of the Palestinian People, and Nicaragua has a long history of supporting Palestinian self-determination. Besides being the first state to petition to join South Africa's case against Israel pending before the ICJ, Nicaragua also filed its own case 2 years ago against Germany for complicity in genocide and other crimes, and a hearing is expected this year. Despite US acts, Nicaragua maintains its commitment to peaceful relations and the use of law. The US uses illegal unilateral coercive measures against Nicaragua, impairing its ability as a sovereign state to engage in its ordinary and necessary economic activities. One area of aggression is blocking Nicaragua from using the World Bank, the IMF, and the Inter-American Development Bank. Despite this, Nicaragua continues to pay its existing loans, is serious about financing development, and conducts accountable operations. According to the central bank's president, Nicaragua has reduced its foreign debt for the period 2006 to 2026 from 84% of GDP to 50% of GDP. There's also another U.S. attempt in the works that I should mention, the filing of another NICA Act in the House of Representatives to try to cut Nicaragua off from loans in the by the Central America Development Bank, a bank in which the U.S. isn't even a member. When you consider that more than 50% of Nicaragua's annual national budget is devoted to healthcare and education, the violence and potential impact on vulnerable people is crystal clear. We need to be serious about solidarity with Nicaragua. Recently, Secretary of State Rubio made threats at the 2026 Munich conference supporting colonialism and the desire to make all states subservient to the U.S., which is obviously a threat against all national sovereignty. This almost seems worse than when the Bush administration declared the FSLN in 2001 was a terrorist organization. Another reason to be concerned is that we know Nicaragua is in the U.S. crosshairs. On February 24th, in a hearing before the U.S. House Appropriations Committee, the head of the National Endowment for Democracy mentioned its third largest program is in the Western Hemisphere and targets Nicaragua. He bragged about their funding of media organizations that have networks in Nicaragua. Information warfare is a key component of the way the U.S. weaponizes human rights while refusing to respect human rights at home. What does it mean to be in solidarity with Nicaragua? It's a question I keep thinking about. The U.S. government and media attack Nicaragua because of its unique socialist model, its support for economic and social rights, for peace development and a sustainable environment, and for redistributing its national wealth to benefit the people. Policies to ensure that public goods like health and education are protected are exactly what international human rights law requires, and the way a country can actually meet its obligations under international law to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. Nicaragua's 21st century political history in resisting neoliberal capitalism, rejecting the neoliberal presidential candidate in 2006, thereafter voting for the FSLN by overwhelming majorities, its welcoming of a female co-president, the overcoming of a coup financed by the USNED in 2018. All these show its commitment to the principles enshrined in the UN Charter of National Sovereignty and to the principles expressed in resolutions on a new international economic order, which demand control over economic resources as a basis for national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Thank you.
Martha. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Richard Hobbs. Richard has an MA in Latin American history from the UNAM in Mexico City and a JD from Golden Gate University. An immigration attorney for 36 years, he is the founder of Human Agenda in San Jose, California. He is helping form a fourth worker-owned cooperative in Silicon Valley and leads emulation tours focused on cooperatives in Cuba, Honduras, and Aragon, Spain. Thank you for being here, Richard. You have the floor.
Thank you. I don't know if we can bring up my PowerPoint.
I'm sure we can. There we go.
There we go. So first of all, I want to wish everyone a happy International Women's Day. And also thank all of you in Nicaragua and around the world, really, who are helping Cuba. I was in Cuba last Sunday. I was there for a week organizing the fourth International Symposium on Cooperatives at the University of Havana, which is going to take place in November. The last time I was in Nicaragua was under a different regime in 1978. So I skipped a few years from 1978 to 2026 to return to Nicaragua, and what a difference. But before I continue, I want to really thank Colleen Littlejohn for hosting the National Lawyers Guild delegation. Next slide. So this picture was taken from my hotel in Granada. And what impressed me was in the space of 20 minutes, I saw three different workers uh, go by. One of them was cleaning the sewer, another one was collecting trash, and another one was sweeping. This is unprecedented in most countries in Latin America. I have traveled extensively. Certainly, Cuba is having its huge problems because of the energy crisis and collecting its own garbage. But it's not only that, but there was potable water in my hotel, which is very unusual for any country in Latin America. And of course, we have to give Nicaragua great praise, being the fifth in the world for female political empowerment, the education and healthcare systems that are free for all, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm here to talk about cooperatives in Nicaragua. Next slide. So before we talk about cooperatives, I'd like to talk about some principles and some values as to why cooperatives really matter. First of all, these are the 7 cooperative principles that every cooperative really subscribes to. Voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, economic participation by members, autonomy and independence, education, training, and information, cooperation among cooperatives, and also concern for the community. Next. In Human Agenda, we have developed these values. We call them DEX values: democracy, equity, cooperation, kindness, and sustainability. And this has guided our work really for the last 24 years, because ultimately, based on a human needs analysis, we've interviewed over 70 groups as to what their human needs are. We obviously need to create new institutions that have these values. When we ask the question, is Monsanto or Bank of America democratic, equitable, cooperative, kind, or sustainable, everyone just laughs in the United States. Major corporations have 0 of these values. But we think that creating new institutions like worker-owned cooperatives do possess all of these values. Cooperatives are democratic, equitable, cooperative, kind, and sustainable. Next. A third way to view cooperatives is through Marxist methodology, looking at the relations of production. We know that socialists have long identified exploitation as the motor of capitalism, and we know that as long as there are owner classes that exploit working classes, capitalism will continue to exist. Cooperatives are non-capitalist relations of production because the workers are the owners. For example, under the Cuban Constitution, cooperatives are considered to be a socialist form of ownership and a socialist form of relations of production. Next. So the first Nicaraguan cooperative was established by none other than Augusto Cesar Sandino in Rio Coco, Nicaragua, on August 27, 1932. Specifically as an alternative to the traditional plantation system. He said, I'm inclined toward a regime of cooperatives. Next. So the person on the right here is, actually, next slide, please. His name is Ariel Bucardo Rocha, and he's the president of the National Confederation of Cooperatives, CONACOOP. And what he said at the end of our dialogue was that cooperatives are the sector that best express the Christian, socialist, and solidarity values the Sandinista government is promoting. Next. And by the way, he is unpaid, and he's the former Minister of Agriculture of Nicaragua. So to get a sense of co-ops in Nicaragua today, there are about 5,184 cooperatives. Most of them are small, family-owned associative enterprises. The lives of about 2 million people, 1 in 3 Nicaraguans, are directly affected by co-ops. They produce over 50% of the gross domestic product, focusing on public transportation, the dairy industry, basic food production, and export sectors such as coffee and beef. There is a Cooperative Development Institute in the Attorney General's office, and this is there to help develop cooperatives. This is one of the biggest problems that Cuba has right now, even though they have a new law since 2012 that promotes non-agricultural cooperatives. There is no Cooperative Development Institute that helps the cooperatives in Cuba. So the general law of cooperatives was approved in 2004, before 2007. And it should be known that co-op loans through Caruna, which is the Caja Rural Nacional, it's the Credit and Service Co-op Federation, they've been blocked by the United States since 2018, according to Ariel Bucardo. And so Ariel recommends a couple of things for co-ops. First, that the smaller cooperatives in the same sector unite and create a single cooperative to be more efficient, and that attracting young people is critical. However, I heard many conversations where elders in Nicaragua are doing everything possible to incorporate younger people, and especially men, because a lot of them are alienated from society and they're looking, just like in Cuba, for consumption rather than participation in the economy. And so I think Nicaragua is making huge strides in incorporating young people into the workforce. Finally, in 2011, there was a National Co-op Day that was established in Nicaragua. Next. So we visited the Carlos Fonseca Cooperative. The person third from the left is Leonel Mora. He is the president of the Carlos Fonseca Cooperative. Next. And a little bit about the Carlos Fonseca Cooperative. First of all, the land, which is near Granada, was expropriated by the Sandinista government after a general of Somoza named Bartolome didn't pay his debts. The state distributed the land to the workers, who still cultivate their individual plots of land. Jose Francisco Ticay Favon organized the first co-op here in this area. He was assassinated in 1982. Two co-ops joined together to form the Carlos Fonseca Cooperative. They have 38 members, and they meet on the 30th day of every month. On December 20th, 2025, that's only a couple of months ago, for the first time ever, the co-op received electricity because of the work of the Sandinista government. It was 60% electrified during our visit, and now the entire region is 100% electrified. The same is true for water. For the first time in its history, the cooperative members have running water. Next. Another region that we visited was the Santa Julia region. In the picture are myself, Lola Esquivel, Luisa, the vice president of the Coffee Cooperative Information, Marvin, who also hosted us, and Edgardo Garcia, who's the president of the Association of Agricultural Workers that represents 1.2 million people in Nicaragua. So Lola Esquivel started working when she was 11 years old. and she's been an organized and a co-op member ever since. Now she is 62 years old. There are 68 families in the region. 28 of the families are in a coffee co-op in formation. The co-op is not legalized yet, but it has elected leadership, bylaws, monthly meetings, and minutes that are taken every month. So it's acting as a cooperative, even though it hasn't received its legal status yet. The co-op exists, however, to fight for land titles and that co-op incorporation. So Luisa, the third, or in the middle of the five of us, is the vice president of the Information Coffee Cooperative. And she explained to all of us how machismo has been erased by 98%. It's the feminization of cooperatives in Nicaragua. She said, for example, that now the men are washing the clothes, washing the dishes, cleaning the house, that the duties traditionally performed by women are now being performed by men, and there has been a complete turnaround in terms of the prior machismo. Also, finally, the local co-ops do not have to pay taxes, which is a big boon for the co-ops and co-op development. Next. So in sum, I think Nicaragua can be seen as a regional model for co-op development in Central America. Nicaragua has more cooperatives than any other Central American country, despite the fact that there is significant co-op development in Costa Rica, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. As an essential component of the Sandinista revolution, we need to support cooperative development in Nicaragua. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our third speaker, Anna Capati. She is an attorney who focuses on the intersectionality of religion, law, and human rights, especially health and gender equity. She graduated from the University of San Diego in 2024 with a concentration in international law and served as an executive editor of the International Law Journal and as the president of the USD National Lawyers Guild. Prior to law school, Anna worked as a clinical social worker in healthcare for more than 2 decades, providing psychotherapy and case management to individuals, families, and groups. She advocated for improved access to care, education, and social services, as well as more responsive policy planning by state and community organizations. Thank you for joining us, Anna. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, and it's very nice to get to have a mini reunion with some of the other delegates and to get to see Becca and Colleen Littlejohn on the webinar with us as well. I just want to make sure that you could hear me okay. I know earlier my volume was a little low. None?
Yes,
Okay,
we hear you well.
perfect. Okay, great. So I am going to be talking about healthcare in Nicaragua, and I'll do it with some nods to International Women's Day as well. So since the 1979 Sandinista Revolution and continuing post-2007, the Sandinista government's policy on healthcare has been to prioritize free, universal, and decentralized access through the National Unified Health System. Key goals include building infrastructure, and while we were there, we saw roads, tons of new roads that were being built, training personnel, and reducing inequities. Since 2007, the Sandinista government has made a long-term financial investment in public health as a priority, with the public hospital network increasing from 33 hospitals in 2007 to 77 in 2025. Also, over the past 10 years, healthcare has gone from being 10% of the government's overall spending to making up 57% of the country's budget. There's also focus on preventative care, vaccinations, and rural outreach. For my presentation, I want to highlight 3 aspects of the healthcare system that stood out to me during our visit to Nicaragua, especially with our visits with the various ministries and civic groups and with Nicaragua's central bank. The first is the expansion of dialysis treatments in the country. The second is the efforts to expand care specifically to the indigenous and Afro-Caribbean communities who have historically lived in more rural areas. And the third is Nicaragua's emphasis on addressing gender equity in healthcare. While there are many facets to Nicaragua's healthcare system that embodies socialist government's approach to providing care as a human right, I wanted to discuss these 3 in particular because they talk to key differences between Nicaragua's approach to providing care with the United States approach, which is the system I'm most familiar with. So with regards to the first aspect, much of the information I'm about to present was inspired by our visit with MINSA, where we met with Compañera Doctora Meiling Brenes, Compañero Dr. Carlos Sanz, and most notably Compañera Doctora Sonia Castro, Ministra Asesora del Presidente de la República para temas de salud. Doctora Sonia Castro spoke very passionately about Nicaragua's program to specifically address the need for more dialysis treatment centers. Healthcare in general is very expensive to provide, especially if the government takes on the responsibility for administering care. However, it's also not the case that the state that spends more money on healthcare has a better healthcare system. So speaking about the expansion of the provisions of dialysis treatments throughout Nicaragua and the United States highlights issues of equity and the ethics of providing chronic care as a for-profit versus a state-run business. So briefly, dialysis is a treatment for people who have kidney failure. Your kidneys filter out the toxins in your body, and you need dialysis treatments if you have kidney failure in order to live. So once you have kidney failure and placed on dialysis, this is basically a lifelong treatment unless you get a transplant, a kidney transplant. In the United States, universal coverage for dialysis was established by the expansion of the Social Security Act in 1972 via the End-Stage Renal Disease Program. This act provided Medicare coverage for dialysis. However, because machines were still sparse, dialysis was initially accessed primarily by white, middle-class working men, even though the program was meant to cover everyone, regardless of ability to pay. However, the pre-existing unofficial rationing of dialysis meant that in the very early stages, beneficiaries who were deemed more deserving of life-sustaining treatment were disproportionately white, young, and employed. But this act only expands Medicare coverage for dialysis regardless of age. You still have to be eligible for Medicare by having enough work credits and by having legal immigration status. So if you're being paid under the table, working as a nanny or a farmer or other labor, it's unlikely that you'll have coverage through Medicare. And the same holds true for other professions like teachers who might pay into another retirement system instead of Social Security. And Medicare itself only pays 80% of the cost of treatments, doctor visits, and other care. So without other forms of insurance, this will usually cost patients about $750 to $800 a month for the rest of their life. And if you get a transplant, you no longer qualify for Medicare if you're under the age of 65 because you don't have renal failure anymore, which leads to a host of other kidney and transplant-related care issues. Now, in contrast, dialysis in Nicaragua at public facilities is provided for free. And the primary reason for why the government was so concerned with expanding treatment is because of a condition that's unique to the agricultural workers in Central America. Nicaragua is actively combating a high incidence of end-stage renal failure due to Mesoamerican nephropathy, which disproportionately affects young agricultural workers in the northwestern region of Nicaragua. So what you're seeing through the expansion of dialysis in Nicaragua is an inversion of what was happening in the US, where the people benefiting are instead agricultural laborers, people you would expect to have the harder time getting access to treatment. The Nica government is specifically directing its attention towards a traditionally underserved group prior to the revolution. and during the neoliberal period. Currently, efforts are focused on occupational health, improving medical infrastructure and training, and there are programs to improve the working conditions of agricultural workers. So Dr. Sonia was talking about programs to make sure that they were working enough shade, that they had enough water, that they weren't being overworked, because that was affecting that they suspect that that was contributing to the nephropathy. So the second aspect of the healthcare system I want to talk about dovetails into this theme. Indigenous and Afro-Caribbean citizens were also traditionally, especially before the revolution and during the neoliberal period, very restricted in their access to healthcare. Healthcare during these times was limited to affluent sectors of the urban population and to the minority of workers who had Social Security coverage. The neglect of Nicaragua's indigenous and Afro-Caribbean peoples was racist and systemic. The health system was fragmented, with limited coordination and very few resources allocated to areas with high concentrations of indigenous and Afro-Caribbean peoples. And a large part of the revolutionary mission has been to rectify these past harms. So we met with Compañera Deputada Shira Downs, who is the president of the commission, the Presidenta de la Comisión Asuntos de los Pueblos Originarios, Afrodescendientes y Regímenes Autonómicos de la Asamblea Nacional, compañero John Hodgkins Dearings, who serves as a deputy in the same agency, as well as Raquel Dixon, who serves as on the board of directors for the National Assembly. Raquel especially emphasized restoring healthcare as a right to all First Peoples and Afro-Caribbeans in Nicaragua. And one way that this is accomplished is by making sure that any public health or other state actions proposed has the participation of the First and Afro-Caribbean peoples. Johnny spoke about how the Caribbean coast is very different from the rest of Nicaragua, especially in terms of diversity in language and cultures. And both he and Shira shared that the way that the state is now meeting the needs of these communities is through homing in on the use of language, making sure that care and education is understandable, that doctors are trained in different languages, and that people within these very communities are also trained to provide care as doctors and nurses and other clinicians. There are also free courses in these different languages available to the public, and patients have a right to an interpreter. There's also pride in ancestral ways of healing, and these local traditions are being incorporated into the national health system. But most importantly, the state is focusing on the social determinants of health. Shira shared that one way they are improving health outcomes is by working towards eradicating poverty, especially in these communities. She gave an example of single mothers who must work while caring for their children and putting citizens who have these unique circumstances at the forefront of government policy. She also emphasized that women are the protagonists in this revolution and that the Nicaraguan Constitution recognizes this. She talked about how women are the ones who speak the native languages at home and carry on traditions, which brings me to the last aspect of Nicaragua's healthcare system and a nod to International Women's Day. Nicaragua has been incredible in closing the gender gap in all areas of life for its citizens. Not only does Nicaragua prioritize women's health through a free and community-focused system, but gender equality laws also ensure that women are represented equally in healthcare administration. So we compare that with the US, where even though 70% of all healthcare providers are female, only a small fraction of C-suite executives in healthcare companies are women. And it should be obvious that increasing the number of women in healthcare leadership and administrative roles is associated with improved patient outcomes and organizational performance. There's been evidence that shows that diverse leadership, including more women, fosters better tailored, patient-centered care. What we see then in Nicaragua are state initiatives that have built 180 casas maternas, which are maternity homes for rural women, 97% of births occurring in hospitals, specialized prenatal, postnatal care, and the integration of traditional midwives into the formal health system. And because of these initiatives, you have outcomes like maternal mortality dropping by nearly 80% since 2007. So I want to thank you all for allowing me to speak today, and for Martha Schmidt and Colleen Littlejohn for organizing members of the National Lawyers Guild to go on this incredible trip. And it's a trip that I will remember dearly. I'm so blessed to have gone to see how the Nicaraguan people are endeavoring to create systems that serve everyone, especially healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Now we'll have a question and answer period. Please put your questions in the question and answer at the bottom of the screen. Thanks. If you just put it in the chat, we won't see it. And I think I'll ask Becca, would you like to choose the first question?
Sure. Yeah. The first question that we'll ask is from Susan Scott. She's asking that if you can address, she missed some of Martha's presentation because of a barking dog, but wondering if you address the current the source of revenues for the current government. Is there mining or extractive commerce? And asked also about the status of the canal. I don't know if your group touched on any of those issues.
Yeah, we really didn't. I know that the economy is mixed, and I think it was there's about 20% foreign direct investment in some of that is, or that's largely in textiles, I believe. And I don't really have, it wasn't something that I actually paid attention to. And as far as the canal issue, I think that's there was one proposal that was rejected, I know, but I don't know what's happening with that. So maybe somebody else from the Solidarity Coalition is more up to date. But obviously it's going to be a, collective decision. And there are a lot of considerations, but obviously there is an interest, and especially given the way that Nicaragua is cut off from economic opportunities because of the actions of the U.S., and including what's happened with the Panama Canal in Panama. I think that people should start rethinking these issues.
Thank you, Marty.
I can add to that a little bit. It looks like there's not going to be a canal in the way it was thought of 10 years ago. They are planning to build a deep water port on the Caribbean coast. And then, of course, we have a large port on the Pacific coast. And we have great roads. So I guess things would go across in trucks. Or maybe they'll build a railroad. I mean, I'm telling you what I think. I'm not giving you any facts here. And where does most of the money come from? It comes from taxes. This government is taxing the wealthy, people who are well off, a lot more than any previous government has. Becca, do you want to add anything?
I was just going to add that, yes, Nicaragua, in comparison with other countries that shall not be named, has a progressive tax system, so that people who have more money actually pay more in taxes. This government is doing a much better job of charging those taxes. For a long time, there wasn't a very good computer-based system to be able to follow up. Now there is a very good system, so that if you go to, if you need some sort of paperwork done, your name pops up in the computer and it says, but in this city, and this city, and that city, you owe taxes. You have to go pay those before you can get this paperwork done. So there's a much better system for following up on people who are delinquent and paying taxes. And that's meaning that there's a much better, a much more money coming in. And of course, as the economy continues to grow, there's more possibility for charging taxes.
I wanted to mention one other thing that I was remembered from our meeting with the president of the Banco Central, and that was there was a demand that by the IMF, this was a while ago, that Nicaragua charge basically redo its tax structure for foreign companies, and there was a huge to-do about corporations paying a 17% rate for Social Security tax, which the country stuck with, and the companies that are now involved in the economy are paying that 17%. So just reinforcing Becca's point that, that I think there are free trade zones in Nicaragua. So people immediately in the US think a free trade zone means that there's no labor law operating, or there's that nothing can be done. But in fact, it also shows how a country that is committed to greater social equality and redistribution, if it sticks to its position, can actually negotiate a better arrangement for its people. And I just thought that was a really interesting point.
This question is for Anna. Did you learn if the incidence of chronic renal insufficiency among the sugarcane workers has been reduced with the improvements to working conditions that you mentioned? The Nicaragua Network had a campaign in support of these workers back in the 2000s.
So I did not get to see if the outcomes have been improved. It would be really interesting. And the other thing is the ideology of the Mesoamerican nephropathy, they're saying that they can't pinpoint exactly what is causing it. So I don't know if maybe even after all of these initiatives, if it's improving, because it doesn't seem like they know like what the underlying cause is. They just know that it affects this population in particular. And I think it's not just in Nicaragua, but other places throughout Central America. But that's definitely something I would love to look into. I don't know if you've heard anything about it.
I do know that groups that were working on that issue here in Nicaragua suddenly came to the conclusion that it was lack of drinking enough water, and they seem to be extremely well funded now. They have definitively said it does not come from anything that the company, which is one of the wealthiest companies in Central America, has done. It's all only water, and they seem to be extremely well funded and are all around the world now. So I would think that maybe someone ought to investigate that a little more closely and see if their funding is somehow correlating with their determination that it's just lack of the workers drinking water.
Wow.
And it is good that they're looking into that and they're treating it. A big difference that we have here in the United States is it's a for-profit company, for-profit endeavor to provide dialysis. So there is a real incentive for dialysis providers to make sure that people continue to be sick. Right. So I've heard doctors, when I was a dialysis social worker, tell me that I can't refer patients for a transplant because, if they're getting transplanted, we're not going to have any business. Right. And so that's something that the Nicaraguan government that's not really in their radar, is to make sure that they keep these people safe. It looks like there's an incentive to make sure that, they are being treated and that they have these programs that address it.
Thank you, Anna. This question is for Richard. Richard, could you please explain how it is?
Do you want to go now?
Yes, sorry, can you hear me? This question is for Richard. Richard, could you please explain how it is that the U.S. can block loans to cooperatives through Coruna?
I really cannot explain that. This is something that Mr. Bucardo explained to me, and I did not delve any deeper.
I think if it's happened since 2018, it probably has to do with the NICA Act that was passed in 2018.
I'm assuming.
which is a kind of sanction.
Yes, more unilateral coercive measures that the US has adopted, and they're illegal under international law.
Thank you, Martha. And for the question about the sugarcane workers, Helen Yule has written that there is extensive information on this on the website of La Isla Foundation. To answer my own question, perhaps the Corona funds, well, Jill, can you put that in the question and answer? Because now I can't get to it. And please, everyone, give us a few more questions.
I have a question here for Richard. I'm wondering, Richard, if you see lessons that the cooperative movement in the United States might perhaps learn from Nicaragua's own co-op development, or important differences between the two countries in their co-op development.
Well, certainly the United States has no national co-op development institute or program. There is one woman who was hired away from uh, an equity co-op in the United States under the Department of Labor, but there is no national support for co-op development, which we see in Nicaragua on a steady basis. The co-ops in Nicaragua meet annually and regularly. In the United States, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives meets every 2 years and attempts to communicate with co-ops virtually, but it's different than being in person and sharing. I've gone to the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperative National Congresses, and that's where people are actually able to get things done. Usually not through presentations, but through talking to people in the same sector. So the other issue, obviously, is that there is no financial commitment to co-ops in the United States of America. There is no fund to help develop co-ops. So I think that Nicaragua is far ahead of the United States.
And Jill Clark said, to answer my own question, perhaps the Corona funds came from the World Bank or the IDB. All that funding was blocked by the NICA Act, and that sounds right to me.
And good old AI tells us that the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control blocked loans to Corona in Nicaragua by designating it under sanctions on October 9th, 2020.
Thank
you, Richard. Becca?
I have a question for all of you who visited Nicaragua. We know that there are accusations in the media, international media, about repression in Nicaragua or lack of freedom of expression. And many of those accusations come from people who haven't been to Nicaragua, at least in many years or ever. Some of the accusations come from people who are originally from Nicaragua, living outside the country, coming from positions of relative or extreme wealth compared with their compatriots in Nicaragua. And I wonder if you all felt any repression while you were here, if you felt that you had, that you could have honest conversations with people. Were you able to converse freely, or were people scared to talk to you? Can you speak to that a little bit?
So I can say that in the last 2 years, I have now visited Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba. And all three of those countries are on the shit list of the United States of America. And on that shit list, what the meaning is all of them are totalitarian dictatorships, and what more do you need to know? And that's the way, pretty much it's perceived in the international press. Recently, I received the e-letter from the Asian Law Alliance here in Santa Clara County, and the first article was on how the Asian Law Alliance had won political asylum for a Nicaraguan who was persecuted in 2018 in Nicaragua. So this is what continues to be propagated in the United States. at pretty much every single level. We have a huge uphill battle to tell the truth about Nicaragua. Obviously, the delegations like the National Lawyers Guild are a good way. I have to say, honestly, just like when I went to Venezuela 2 years ago, I had my questions about Venezuela. And similarly, I had my questions about Nicaragua because you hear so much, why does Daniel stay in power? Well, there are good reasons for that. But uh, clearly, the propaganda against Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela is completely manufactured and completely dominating the airwaves, beginning with the New York Times.
And I would say also that I, everybody was free to talk. That there's no sense of people being afraid to talk about many things. So I don't think that that characterizes Nicaragua. I also, like Richard, have made it an attempt to and have been in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua since 2022. So, and follow the news. And one of the things that I feel is very important and why I brought up the National Endowment for Democracy in my presentation is that the information war is one of the ways in which the United States convinces people that it's the US business to determine whether other countries are democratic or authoritarian according to the US. And first of all, I would say it's up to people in the US to fix the US. That's our first job. We don't have human rights here. And other countries can have the sovereign right to make their own priorities and without US aggression. So I feel really strongly about that, especially now when we see the agenda of the US is out in the open: overt regime change, overthrow of governments. And it's clear that's where things are heading. So I agree that no country is perfect, but I don't think that I think that media, the information war is something that people have to understand. And I also think that people should ask of organizations that are critical or condemning Nicaragua as a quote authoritarian government or whatever, should be asking about NED funding and to whom it goes to, because you can't ignore US interference, which also is a violation of international law, interference in the internal affairs of a country. So the question remains, what is solidarity? This was meant to be a solidarity delegation. And I am convinced that solidarity is facilitating countries like Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela to make their own sovereign choices, and for the US and for us in the US to prevent the US government from forcing them not to make the choices that they made.
Excellent, Martha.
Anna,
Thank
did you
you.
want to add something?
Yeah, so with to follow up on what Martha was saying about U.S. intervention, I think that there have been ongoing situations that have been created by U.S. intervention that kind of creates this environment where legitimate, political concerns are mired with, like the US doing some really shady stuff. And so we heard from local Nicaraguans who said that, during the 2018 you know, uh, conflict, that there were neighbors and people within their own communities who were getting dragged into to all of this fighting. That they suspected that if the U.S. wasn't involved, that they wouldn't have been, that they wouldn't have been, helping set up like blockades or certain things or turning on their neighbors, right? So when somebody says that there is repression against people who are who are political dissenters, I almost want to know like what are the exact examples of that, or because I could see like in this world where people could say I am being, repressed for my speech when there could have been a lot of other stuff going on. And I know I'm not making this very, very clear, but I think like having more examples would probably be um, a lot better in discussing um, this issue of free speech in Nicaragua. I don't know if it's totally accurate that that's what's happening. I don't if that makes sense.
Well, and it gets back to my issue, which is speech is one right among many, and speech is always balanced with other human rights. There's a balancing of human rights. And for example, in the US, uh, you cannot have a union, you cannot in the workplace, in many workplaces, you can't talk union or you'll be fired. I mean, there's no free speech at all. And I know this intimately from my long history as labor and employment lawyer. It's absurd to say that you have free speech everywhere. But I think the other issue is, and Susan raises the issue about, people, repression existing of people for various reasons in various countries. And obviously individuals continue to raise that. But I think the issue here is how are people in the US going to be in solidarity with people in countries that the US is threatening to invade or has invaded or has economic warfare going on at this time? And what does it mean to be in solidarity? Anyway, so that is, I think, a very key question. And people can pursue their particular interests, obviously, but in terms of, being a person of the left and being in solidarity and being anti-colonialist, I think it means respecting other countries' autonomy, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, their economic control of their resources, and their ability to function as states.
Becca, do you have anything to say? And then would you like to pick another question?
Thank you very much. There's a couple of questions that have come up in the chat that I would like to address. There's a question here in particular about the United Nations. I'm looking for it here. It says that can anyone explain how the US can block so much attempts for progress at the UN? And also, how can the US withdraw from the ICJ without withdrawing from the UN Charter itself? And is there any effort to pursue reparations from the ICJ to Nicaragua or through any other venue? I don't know if you all have any insight to lend to those questions.
We actually discussed that. So taking the UN, first of all, the US is on the Security Council. There is no Latin American country on the Security Council, even though Latin American countries were 20 of the 51 states that founded the UN. The US can, because of its economic and political power, can block all kinds of initiatives at the UN. We were given the example by the UN permanent representative that when it was time for Nicaragua to become the president of the General Assembly, that the US UN representative went around and they threatened Nicaragua that they would lose everything, they would block every economic loan that they threatened other countries. Nonetheless, Nicaragua was still elected. But it's that kind of power. As far as the bank, the IMF, the US has a majority of shares. It's not equal, one country, one vote. So the US has more shares and it can block Nicaragua from getting any kind of loans or other arrangements. And the reparations issue was interesting. We were really hoping that there was some way maybe that Nicaragua could raise that again at the in the International Court of Justice. But what happened there is also instructive. The after the decision in 1980, well, the U.S. withdrew from the court, from the jurisdiction, which it actually, that was something that a state could give notice to withdraw. It was precipitous, and it happened because the U.S. Because the International Court found that it had jurisdiction in the case, which the U.S. strongly objected to. And there's also some law from the 1950s Cold War era that has made it very difficult for U.S. to be subject to the UN and international treaty law. But the reparations issue, I just want to summarize this because what happened is that Nicaragua itself withdrew from, they filed a petition saying that the matter had been adjudicated satisfactorily. And that was done by the neoliberal government that was elected in and came into power in 91. And apparently George Bush told Chamorro that the U.S. was going to give a lot of aid to Nicaragua. This is one story. Who knows whether that happened, but in any event, Nicaragua was, quote, persuaded to file a petition, and this followed an attempt by the Sandinista government to prevent that from happening, and when Chamorro was elected, that being overturned in the National Assembly. So essentially, the issue of reparations now is up to us, solidarity movement people, because it can't be resuscitated in the International Court of Justice because a final decision to actually the amount to be paid had to be fixed by the court. It was left to be determined. So it's still, obviously, it would be the just thing to do. And I think it's something that we should all bring up about our government, we US people, and its defiance of international law.
Thank you. The next question is, has there been discussion about lack of enforcement of an international law, especially now as the world has witnessed impunity towards international law related to illegal wars?
I can say that here in Silicon Valley, we are organizing on March 17th a rally. It's called The Collapse of International Law, Impacts on Local Residents. I think it's important to hold as many public demonstrations, protests, and press conferences, which what we're going to be doing, related to the breakdown of international law. We are going to have speakers on the breakdown of human and humanitarian rights under international law. Also, how the Refugee Act of 1980 has been violated. Nobody can no longer seek asylum or refugee status in the United States under Biden, 125,000 refugees were allowed into the United States. Under Trump, 7,500 Afrikaners, white Afrikaners, are allowed into the United States. So the refugees from other countries have been stopped from being able to enter. Actually, the day that Trump took office on January 20th, 2025, there were 850,000 people that had appointments in the U.S. that were at the Mexican border. And on that day, he ended the CBP app. And so none of those people have been able to apply for political asylum due to persecution. And that is a complete abrogation of international law. Every country is required to allow people who are fleeing persecution to apply for asylum. There are many other aspects. Obviously, we will have speakers about Iran, about Cuba, about Venezuela, about Palestine, and we'll probably even have speakers on that have to pay the high rate of gasoline because that's also an effect of the abrogation of international law. So we need to, point out all of these impacts of the pretty much the complete destruction of the international legal system.
Thank you. Becca, you want to pick the next question?
Yeah, there's one question in there that just asks about about kidney transplants and how readily available they are. And I'll just go ahead and answer that one. That up until recently, it was almost impossible to get transplants of any kind, organ transplants of any kind in Nicaragua. But just recently, two of our hospitals have become equipped to be able to do transplants, both pediatric transplants and for adults, with kidneys being one of the kidney transplants as being a priority. So that's something that Nicaragua is now able to move into. There has been a legal framework for transplants and also for organ donation for a time, but that hasn't really been a practical possibility up until just this year, just a few months ago. And so that's something that we expect to be seeing a lot more of coming up soon. I will also note just in the area of the chronic renal insufficiency that many people here may remember the banana workers. They were called Los Nemagon, which was actually the name of the chemical that poisoned them. And those banana workers were suffering from a lot of health issues, and they had brought a case in the United States against Chiquita and Dole. They tried bringing cases in Nicaragua, and none of those panned out. And just recently, those same workers, this is more than 20 years later, lost a case in the European Union that they had brought against those big corporations, banana corporations. But these folks actually came in from Chinandega, marched into Managua, and camped out in front of the National Assembly trying to get some kind of help from the Nicaraguan government during the neoliberal years. And they even at one point staged a die-in where they buried themselves alive right across the street from the National Assembly and received no support from the neoliberal governments. As soon as the Sandinistas came back into power, however, they said very frankly, we don't think you're ever going to get anything from these international big companies. And so they gave them the land that they had camped on across the street from the National Assembly and built them all houses. And all of those people have homes there, and it's called Nemagon City there. But they have these lovely little houses in what is quite a nice area of town now. So that's just to note that sometimes in these cases, getting reparations from the companies is pretty impossible. But the Nicaraguan government, in the case of the banana workers, was able to respond directly to them.
It was primarily Monsanto was the company that they went after the most. They actually won a couple of different times, but then, the companies would take it to appeals court and it would be reversed. Okay, we have another question. We're just about out of time. Did you get a sense of how Nicaragua has been able to maintain macroeconomic stability? and at the same time be able to improve health, education, infrastructure, etc., to the degree that it has. So many countries have not been able to do this. Is there less corruption in Nicaragua? Nicaragua is always praised for prompt and efficient execution of projects, which may mean low levels of corruption.
Well, I'll just say a couple words and then Anna. We did actually, I think that is true, that Nicaragua has a record, a very good record of accountability for and money that's invested. It also has a significant foreign direct investment and which has been growing. It has a mixed economy, and I think that it's a very, some people say, oh, it's not a socialist country, it's social democracy, whatever. It has a large public sector. It guarantees certain rights, and it is the must. And it's not. Its debt is lower, ironically, in part because of the cutoff of loans, but also because of the self-sufficiency that Nicaragua is dedicated to. And I will also mention that Nicaragua is unusual in that it's large. It has a very large agricultural sector. It has many more people who are in agriculture, farming, and so forth than a lot of countries, nor does it have a huge concentration of people in urban areas. So it has some advantages, and it has low inflation and and low unemployment. So I think it's a mixture of policies.
Anyone else?
If I could just add anecdotally, our driver was pulled over for going, I think 80 kilometers an hour in a 45-kilometer-an-hour zone. And we had a lengthy discussion about corruption in Nicaragua. And I actually wrote my master's thesis at the UNAM in Mexico City on corruption in Mexico, 600 pages, corruption in Mexico. And from what, I deduced, I certainly am no expert on Nicaragua, but from what I deduced, I believe that the corruption is far less. Mordidas, as they call them in Mexico, or bribes, are far less common in Nicaragua than many countries. Maybe you who live there know more than I'm sure you do. The other thing that impressed me was the fact that the salaries of the state functionaries are so low. So I was told that Daniel Ortega receives $3,500 a month, and that the ministers receive $3,300 a month, and the co-ministers, of course, too, and the co-presidenta. But that's nominal compared to almost any country on earth. It shows that there's a real commitment to distributing wealth throughout the country and to not hoarding wealth.
Thank you. Becca, do you have anything else?
Oh, can I say something really quick about the
Sure. Sorry, Anna.
macroeconomic stability? Yeah, no, it's totally okay. So we got to meet with the head of the central bank in Nicaragua, and one thing that he talked a lot about, which I thought was really interesting, and lends to and answers this question about the macroeconomic stability, is that the government did try to do partnerships with these large corporations, these large businesses, but there were certain demands that were put on these companies, and so these companies didn't want to play, right? They didn't want to take the contracts from the government. So these small businesses have taken the space of big businesses. So you do see a lot of smaller family-owned businesses around Nicaragua. And even our driver was very business minded. He's like, I want to grow chickens. I'm going to work with my dad. So it seems like there's this environment of people in the community going, I want to do stuff for myself, or having ideas, right? Even in the co-ops, they're talking about what they want to grow and how they want to grow it. So I think because there's a lot more room that's been opened up by big businesses stepping back, that there's just like this kind of like air of entrepreneurship, I think, in some of the smaller communities, which I thought was really neat. Um, and I also found that, you know, with regards to macroeconomics, what the government is doing by focusing on infrastructure and building roads and taking care of housing, that really does lend to people having more room to go out and build their own businesses.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Becca, do you have anything else? We're pretty much out of time.
No, just to say that I think Anna's absolutely right in that Nicaragua's macroeconomic strategy actually involves this this very microeconomic as well, which is the creative economy and these small businesses, providing support to these small businesses, and is in fact able to produce all of these changes in the country because it has the political will to do so. Nicaragua's whole 5-year plan and entire development strategy is based on is eradicating poverty and supporting the people who need it the most in order to lift society up, as in the no more trickle down, but in fact growing up. So thank you, all three of you, for all of your contributions. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and also to our participants. Hope to see you in April.
Thank you, everyone, for
Thank
coming.
you.
Good to see you.
Thank you very
Good to
much.
see you all. Thanks.
Thank you.